Welcome. We're very excited today to have a special guest, Michelle Agopsowicz. Our subject today is trauma. Now, trauma is something that surrounds us completely, and we're often not aware of it. When I have patients come in and I'm having conversations with them, I realize that they have a lot of traumatic events throughout their life, but trauma is not within my scope of practice. So it's really important that I have professional help so I can make referrals to individuals who are trained in this field so they can help people. And that's why we have Michelle coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's so good to have you here.
Nice. Yeah, thank you.
Now, just so I can get my introduction correct here, Michelle has a master's degree in social work and a bachelor's degree in community rehabilitation and disability studies. She runs a private practice called Illuminated Path Counselling. And besides her own practice, she also works for Glasgow Grief Support Center, correct?
Yes.
There?
Yeah.
And if that's not enough, you're also a sessional instructor at Mount Royal University. Mm-hmm. So you are very, very busy.
Very busy.
Okay. Now, just want to read a little quote here that I took off from your website there. And that Michelle has a passion for working with individuals struggling with trauma in every shape and form, from life-threatening, altering events to moments that overwhelm and reconstruct the meaning of our lives. You're very passionate about dealing with trauma. What got you into this field? Why?
Yeah.
What is this all about for you and your life?
So I think the same as anything, most of us find the passion of what we want to do in our lives from our own experience. So of course,
right.
I have my own history of trauma and have spent a lot of my own life dealing with some of the things that I want to resolve. And within that, some of those are what we would call fairly large big T traumas. And many of them are the small T traumas, which are like the bumps and bruises that happen within life. So some of this came out of my own experience. My dad has been ill my entire life, and a lot of that has been traumatizing for me as, say, a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old, not quite understanding what was happening within that. And it's shaped and formed me in many beautiful ways, but it's also given me, little symptoms of trauma here and there that have caused issues. And so as trauma started to become more in the zeitgeist of the community of what we were talking about within counseling, it was sort of a natural fit for me. And the reason why I'm passionate about trauma professionally is because I truly believe it's a universal experience.
Okay, so everyone is traumatized to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, yeah.
Yes.
And I think the reason why I'm passionate about that is because that could seem like a really heavy topic. Like, oh, that seems like a very bad news activity to think that everybody has trauma. I actually see it the other way around. So I see it as empowering.
Okay.
And I see it as destigmatizing in terms of the things that we struggle with.
Most people are not even cognizant that they have had some type of trauma, are they?
Yeah, no, and I don't think we necessarily label it. It's really starting to catch some theme in popular media now as we're starting to talk about it differently, because what we understand now is that those big T traumas, like I talked about, which are like childhood abuse and neglect, things that really shatter our world, violence, terrorism, things that we would think about as traumatizing, the things that we see on the news.
Okay.
Most of us would assume those are traumatizing.
Right. So what are common symptoms of trauma? What are because if people aren't cognizant of it, they're probably not aware that there's a relationship between something they're experiencing and the previous traumas.
Yeah.
So what sort of things are we talking about?
Yeah, and so when we're talking about big T traumas, these are the obvious things. So these are the things we know from research studies now that cause inflammation in the body, cause pain in the body, cause things, we're starting to see correlations between, of course, anxiety, depression, and mental health issues, so the things that happen in the brain for us. But we're also starting to recognize that it definitely has a link between diabetes and autoimmune conditions, health conditions, some of the things that you would see just from chronic stress in day-to-day, such as like sciatica and plantar fasciitis and the tension that we hold within our body, because trauma essentially overwhelms our system. And so we constrict within that. And when we're working within a constricted system, we can start to have that show up in our fascia,
Right.
in our bones, in our mental health, in our physical health. And some of the things that people might not recognize is those smaller T traumas.
Okay. So anything that wraps up our sympathetic nervous system.
Yes.
So
yes.
when we talk about it winding up that system.
Yeah.
And so blood pressure, adrenal function, fight and flight responses, stress, insomnia, all of these things, the things that, we don't even realize, we think it's something, that's related to something current.
Yeah.
But actually there's an underlying problem there they're not dealing with at all.
Yeah, so we could lay that foundation down at age 5.
Okay.
That we become a person who's a bit constricted in that way. But then we also have the traumas that don't happen in childhood that are some of the more small T traumas, such as, say, divorce, illness, grief, loss of loved ones, car accidents we might get into, or a cluster of those things. So sometimes we don't always recognize the stress within our system when, say, we've had 5 small things, but now they've flooded our nervous system. And our parasympathetic nervous system is going into that fight or flight, which is pumping out those stress hormones. And it becomes a bit of a feedback loop because, like you say, the adrenals start sending off cortisol, which sends a signal to the heart, which increases the heart and blood rate, which sends signals to the brain saying we're in danger. The brain then sends signals back, and we get into this chronic feedback loop of continuing to be triggered within that trauma or that stress response.
So so if we have something going on there, we don't deal with it. We're not really dealing with the root cause of something. All we're dealing with symptoms, and then it can continue on and just keep cascading into something else.
And so we might not understand why we're having pain in the body or why we're experiencing depression, but the origin of it is many years later. And that's what I'm passionate about, is saying there's nothing wrong with you. Trauma isn't about, trauma is about what's happened to you and about how your system has responded. It's not about there being something wrong with you, but within our culture, we do talk about what's wrong with us and why can't I fix myself and why can't we do these things, right?
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. That's incredible. So tell me a little about your process.
So I think within that, we also don't get taught how to calm ourselves down. So how to soothe our nervous system. So whether that is through getting massages or coming to chiropractor or having a passion for climbing or running or sitting and meditating in mindfulness or being in nature, all of these things help soothe our inner child and repattern that nervous system. To essentially learn that we are safe, because we don't get taught how to recover and feel safe again. Right?
Could you tell me a little bit more about mindfulness and how you've integrated that into your practice?
So I think a lot of people think that mindfulness is this meditation. You have to be Buddha on the mountaintop, meditating for hours a day to kind of repattern.
You don't?
You don't. That's lovely if that's your jam, right? If that's what you like to do, then that's fantastic. But mindfulness is about the intention of everything that we come to life with. So are we intentionally... You poured me tea before. We were intentional about that. We were mindful about that. We were mindful about this conversation that we had. Because we thought about it, we reflected on it. So when we're out for a walk, we can throw in our AirPods. But, sometimes it's good to take those out too, so that we can be in tune with nature and really be mindful of that and be aware of how our body's moving. We can be mindful when we're cooking. Most of the things that we enjoy in life, we rush through. Because our culture is also taught this disease of busyness, that actually we get rewarded for ramping our nervous system up. And so, but we could be, the reason why gardening is relaxing is because it's mindful. The reason why some people like baking is because it's mindful for them. And so it's really about finding what is mindful for you and then being really just slowing it down a little bit, being intentional about what it's giving you.
It sounds very similar to, in the morning time, I do Tai Chi every day. I go out behind our place and I go in the woods and I just basically try and take some time to just be currently in the present moment, focus on breath, and it's not a disassociation, it's actually an association. In other words, it's like you have clarity in terms of the environment, the trees, the grass, everything. It calms you right down, but it also gives you a feeling of being one with your environment.
Yes, connected. And what trauma does is goes us into, so we all dissociate. I like that you say dissociation versus association.
Okay.
Because we see dissociation as a bad thing, and it is a trauma response, but we all dissociate sometimes.
Right.
When we're driving and we're not really paying attention, or when we're daydreaming, we are dissociating a little bit. But what trauma does for us is that dissociation becomes a coping strategy. And in that dissociation, we're worried about the next event or not being where we are. And this is why mindfulness is so helpful with trauma.
Okay.
Because we're relearning that it's safe to be in the moment, whereas when trauma happened, it wasn't safe to be in the moment.
Right. And the more we experience, the more overwhelmed we become?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so there's the trauma symptoms we talked about, which are these big things, but then there's also the other patterns of coping it creates in our life. Like, I'm a people pleaser and a perfectionist. That's a coping strategy just as a personality that kind of came out of my own trauma.
Okay.
So we all have patterns of ways of being, people who are type A and want to be really organized, right? That's to give us a semblance of control.
Okay.
And so it makes us feel safe to do those sorts of things. And there's nothing wrong with doing those things, but it's about being mindful about why we do them.
Okay, so most people have an association of negativity with, saying, okay, there's something wrong with me. There's something bad, there's something negative here. But you're saying it's not bad, it's not negative, or so you're actually changing your association with what we perceive as negativity, but it's not.
Yes,
it's not negative.
It's not, and it's also okay to be in negativity sometimes.
Okay, all right.
So the other thing that our culture is really not so good at is thinking we can't have any of the bad emotions, right?
Okay.
So we can't be frustrated, we can't be angry, we can't be anxious. We need to banish those. We need to exile those emotions.
Yes.
And yet those emotions belong within us.
Okay, all right.
And they actually last longer and get louder and then might show up in the body. The longer we ignore them, instead of saying, I'm frustrated today.
Okay.
I'm watching the experience, I'm being mindful of the experience of being frustrated.
Okay.
Versus trying to exile and saying, I don't want that shadow piece of me.
So the suppression is actually very harmful.
It is, right? And yet all of us from birth,
right? Okay.
especially within our culture, right? Versus, it is sort of a Buddhist idea, right? That you should befriend every aspect of yourself. Versus,
that makes so much sense.
Versus exiling, and yet we do because it's uncomfortable. Why would we want to be angry and anxious and frustrated? Because our initial human reaction is to say, well, that doesn't feel good, so I want it to go away, and I'll make it go away whatever way I can, and that's when it shows up as like addictions.
Okay.
So it starts to show up as overconsumption, or overworking, or anything that.
So how do we change this relationship then to anger and frustration?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly hard, and this is the other thing, is I think our culture is also a quick fix.
Okay.
So within, oftentimes we want to go to therapy or have a chiropractor or take a pill and have it fixed kind of with a one action thing, whereas this is a way of being.
Okay.
So it's a way of being in acknowledging that we have anger. As a woman, I'm going to speak that we definitely, as women, get taught not to be angry, right? Whereas men get taught not to show emotion and be sad. We tend to be socialized in this way.
Right. We're taught suppression.
Suppression, yes.
Yeah, and suppression is very damaging.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And so then we need to practice on a daily basis coming back to it. Even as a therapist, I'm like, I was angry this weekend, yet I tried to banish it. And so the interesting nature is to just say, I'm doing that thing again. Just have some curiosity, maybe even playfulness around. Interesting that I'm going into that pattern again. Why am I in that pattern? Okay, nice big red flag of, can you make anxiety or anger or any of these difficult emotions your ally, because they are actually an early warning system saying, hey, something's out of balance.
Okay, so how do we change this relationship then? What are some of the tools that you use to actually change the way we deal with anger and frustration?
So for some people, it's learning how to breathe into that. It's doing some visualization. I do some tapping with people at times. Sometimes we do guided meditations and different things. And then some people need more advanced strategies, such as eye movement desensitization reprogramming that really works on repatterning the nervous system and the brain neural pathways using eye movements and tapping. It's complicated.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of peer review research on that now.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how that's come forward. And just please tell me a bit more.
It's fascinating because when what we call as EMDR is
okay.
It started in the 90s sort of as this therapist who just discovered that when she moved her eyes when she walked, that some of her trauma moved. And so when it started, it was seen as a little bit out there, a little bit alternative. There wasn't any real research to back behind it. So for quite a while, there was this idea that we shouldn't really trust it.
Okay.
And yet now it's sort of the gold standard of dealing with trauma in so many ways because we have brain scans. We can hook people up to heart rate monitors and track how this actually changes. And people get results quicker than traditional talk therapy because we're actually creating new neural pathways. We're showing your brain another direction to go versus treading the old path.
So this is something you actually do on a regular basis in your practice?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
And the thing that's exciting about it is we're starting to learn more and more about this kind of stuff that probably more traditional energy medicine, chiropractic, acupuncture have always known.
Right.
And we're starting to get really fascinating peer-reviewed information on like self-compassion and mindfulness and EMDR.
Yes.
We're starting to get actual evidence.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so much coming out now. I go to the international fascial conferences, and some of the explanations have changed for acupuncture, but I look at some of the research coming out of Harvard and other schools, and it's just incredible what they're finding with functional MRI studies, with so many different things.
Yeah.
This is such a incredibly interesting conversation we're having here.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to put your information below in the description so that people can contact you, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who want to ask you questions, and so I'll put all your contact information down there, different links down there. But this has been great. Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
Well, and thank you so much for having me. It's an amazing opportunity to have a fantastic conversation.
No, appreciate it, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care.
You too.